And it's mismanagement that's the problem. Like, we've altered how the river should naturally run and we haven't done enough to fix it. Is that right?
Absolutely. One of the most frustrating things to hear, particularly during those first fish kills, was politicians in particular saying that they're natural.
Yeah.
On the scale that we are seeing, and we have repeatedly seen out in Menindee, these fish kills are not natural and they should not happen. And if we allow them to continue to happen, then the native fish species of the Murray-Darling Basin are going to be at serious risk moving forward.
One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains big economic issues in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and recently Federal Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek announced that she's brokered a new deal between the federal government and the basin states of Queensland, the ACT, New South Wales and South Australia relating to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. This reinvigorated basin plan will extend the plan deadlines and have a renewed focus on water buybacks, among other things. We've also seen some pretty alarming reports recently relating to the Menindee fish kills, which you might have seen on the news a while back, and things aren't looking good for the Murray Cod.
The Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek will seek to push the Murray-Darling Basin Plan past the 2024 deadline.
The federal government has struck a deal to rewrite the $13 billion scheme.
The revised agreement allows for the wide-scale resumption of water buybacks.
What we're proposing is more time, more money, more options and more accountability.
The Farmers Federation says without widespread support, the plan could harm regional communities.
We don't want to see buybacks used for water recovery.
The Greens want buybacks without delays.
If the river doesn't have enough water to survive, there are no jobs. There are no jobs on a dead river.
With millions of fish carcasses continuing to rot in the Darling River.
It's an environmental disaster on a monumental scale.
So today, my guest is Kate McBride, researcher at the Australia Institute and Menindee local, to give us the lowdown. G'day, Kate. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Kate, first of all, for people who don't know, what is the Murray-Darling Basin Plan and why is it important?
So to explain the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, we sort of have to go back to the Millennium Drought. And of course, a lot of the listeners will remember the terrible scenes that we saw during that of lack of waters in river and also struggling farmers. Now, during that time, the one thing that came out of it was recognising that we're taking too much water from the environment. And so the government of the day put in place what was called the Water Act of 2007. That essentially said that we need to put a plan in place to try and return some water because essentially we're taking too much from the river system. Fast forward to 2012, we finally got agreement between basin states on what was to be the Murray-Darling Basin Plan.
It's being described as the most historic decision in water management since the Snowy Mountains scheme. Today, the much-anticipated Murray-Darling Basin Plan will finally be unveiled.
I think Australians, across the board are concerned about the future of the Murray-Darling Basin.
Burn the plan! Burn the plan! Get out of here and let us alone!
There was a lot of fighting of numbers and arguing with science, one could say, over the numbers, particularly during those years, but we did get the basin plan. Now, the Murray-Darling Basin covers 14% of Australia. It's a huge part of the country, yeah, and a great deal of our irrigation and farming comes from the basin, so it's really important. But what the basin plan tried to do is find a balance between water that we're taking out for productive purposes and the environment, because we need to protect that moving forward.
Yeah, and so basically there's been a lot of difficulties in the past with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan because obviously the water has to come from somewhere. And so obviously one of the difficulties that the government has faced in tackling this is you need agreement. It can't just be the federal government doing it by themselves. They also need the agreement of the basin states. Is that right?
Absolutely. And this is a bit of a tough one because, of course, all states have sort of vested interests. They want to make sure that there's water for their states before anyone else. But that's where this water sharing comes into it. And it is quite difficult. Since sort of federation, we've been having arguments about how much water should flow down the river. And particularly for the state at the end of the river, South Australia, this has been really important. So, yeah, it has been tough to try and get everyone together. But Tanya Plibersek has brokered a new agreement between those states, because the original Murray-Darling Basin Plan was meant to be finished by the middle of next year. And we've known for a lot of years that wasn't going to happen just because we haven't been recovering enough water. So there's a bit of a change to what's going to be happening, extended deadlines, and as you said, increase in things like water buybacks coming, but it has got to go through the federal parliament as well. But what she's brokered is a deal between the states.
And is it all the states that are on board?
This is the interesting part, is that Victoria has chosen to not be involved in this new agreement. They will see the extensions of deadline for Basin Plan implementation, but they put at risk funding. So part of the agreement between the basin states and the federal government was saying that we'll put some more funding on the table to deliver the Basin Plan. And Victoria said, no, we're not going to be involved in that because they don't like something called water buybacks. So they're just refusing to be involved. But it does mean that that funding essentially isn't going to go to Victoria.
Now New South Wales has joined other basin states backing the Plibersek proposal, leaving Victoria out in the cold.
Victoria has refused to sign up to the deal, arguing it has delivered more water than any other state.
See, our position is long-standing and clear, but we continue to talk.
We're still talking. That's a good thing. I've got a great relationship with Premier Andrews.
Okay, and for those who don't know, can you just explain to me in a little bit more detail what are the water buybacks and why is Victoria chosen not to participate because of those?
So there's a number of ways where we can put water back into the river through the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. There's things called efficiency projects, but the cheapest and most efficient way is through something called a water buyback. And what that is a government essentially saying, we're going to buy some water back. And if you were an irrigator, you can say, okay, I've got X amount of water to sell, and this is the price that I will take.
So if you're an irrigator, you might have a license for taking a certain amount of water from the river. That's what a license is?
Yep. Yeah. So think of it as if you have 2 buckets of water that you've got a license for, you as an irrigator might say, I'm going to sell one of my buckets of water back to the government and it can go to the environment. Now, it's the cheapest way because essentially the government gets to decide what's value for money and what isn't value for money. But the most important part of this is that they're voluntary. This is not the government coming in and forcing irrigators to sell their water or anything. This is people, whether it be at the end of their career or just looking to reduce some debt from their business, selling part or all of their license to the government, and then that can go to the environment. And just as any irrigator has the right to sell their water license to another irrigator or a water broker or anyone else that wants to purchase that water, they should have the right to also sell that to the environment.
So it's not just the government buying things, people buy and sell water licenses regularly.
There's a whole water market in the Murray-Darling Basin, and it's really complex. And another change that's coming, hopefully, with this new legislation is actually some increased transparency as well within the water market, because it is a bit of a, no one knows exactly who owns all the water and where it's all going.
Bit of a black box.
It is, it is. The Basin Plan can sometimes be held up by other countries as really the way to go, but something that has been problematic is the way that the water market has been set up, and water flows to crops with the highest value. And so that's been an interesting one to see how that's played out over the recent years as well.
What will shock some is the use of buybacks, which could cost billions of dollars.
To do what the science and the economics has always advised we should do, and that is to get in there to buy the water back so that there are environmental flows guaranteed for the river.
So how are things looking federally apart from the states? The Environment Minister's got all the other states except Victoria. How do things look in the federal parliament?
This is where it will get interesting in coming months. So the legislation is being introduced this week, and next week it will be debated in the House of Representatives. By November, it'll be into the Senate, and that's, of course, where things will get interesting when it comes to having to negotiate with other parties, whether it be the Greens or the Coalition, on what this is going to look like moving forward. So it's a bit of a wait and see. I know there's a lot of negotiations going up on the Hill at the moment on what this is going to look like when it passes the Senate. So we'll wait and see what the legislation comes to as the House, and then of course when we get to the Senate it will go to an inquiry from what I understand, and we'll hopefully hear more about it then.
The Australia Institute's research on the Murray-Darling Basin in the past has supported water buybacks, but I know there's been some concerns with how the market operates. You were talking about the lack of transparency for one. Can you just tell us a little bit about what Australia Institute research has looked at in the past?
So the Australia Institute has looked at buybacks in quite detailed reports. One thing that we did look at is some of the more questionable water buybacks. And so what we've been advocating for a long time is for voluntary open tender buybacks. So that's where the irrigator can sort of put a certain amount of water up and the government decides whether it's value for money. What we saw a number of years ago with things like the Watergate scandal and a few others around the basin was actually direct negotiation buybacks. So we haven't really been supportive of them because their value for money is questionable, and there's also some other deals that have been quite interesting done within the basin as well.
So the issue with some of those is more or less like taxpayers really weren't getting value for money, and would it be correct to say some of those issues also involved, like, was there actual real water being bought back? Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. So we touched on water licences before, but there's a whole range of different water licences within the basin. Some have high reliability, others a lot less reliability. And so when it comes to looking at what water the government is buying, that's another thing that they have to consider. Will this water be there during the drier years as well as the wet years, or is it just during those sort of flood years where the environment certainly needs the water, but we do need to focus on those drought years in particular?
Hundreds of thousands of dead fish have been discovered in the Darling River at Menindee in our state's far west.
It's similar to a fish kill 4 years ago. That one was caused by drought. Ironically, this time it appears to be floods.
To me, it was like the coral bleaching moment for the inland. It was an incredible wake-up call.
It's like a slow funeral procession. That's what it feels like. You know, it just hangs over the town. Menindee doesn't want to be known for this.
A disaster, Australian disaster, and it should be treated as such. Like a bushfire, like a flood.
The next drought is around the corner.
So, Kate, we have seen that it's been a couple of years of La Nina and we're now headed into El Nino. I know that you are from Menindee. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've experienced and what the communities out near Menindee have experienced in the recent past?
So the listeners, I think, will all probably remember in recent years a number of mass fish kills that have occurred out near Menindee. It has been really devastating for the local community and, of course, the environment as well. We saw the first sort of huge ones back in 2018-19, and unfortunately, again, this year we saw another set of fish kills which killed between 20 and 30 million fish. Now,
20 and 30 million.
Yeah.
That's so huge. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I've always sort of said that, if they were fluffy koalas piled up, then I think people would be a lot more outraged. But unfortunately, because they're fish, we sometimes sort of think maybe, it's not quite as bad. But the community recognises how bad it is, and we've long been fighting for better water policy within the basin. It's essentially led me here to the Australia Institute assisting in that, of course, as well. But yeah, we did get a report come out this week, or last week, sorry, on, it was a survey on how many fish are essentially in the Lower Darling-Bakka river system, and it's really not looking good for certain native fish species. Now, just to give everyone a bit of an indication, of course, the Murray River is essentially sort of like because of all the locks and weirs, we see sort of stagnant water. It's not a free-flowing river like what our native fish species need. Now, the Darling-Bakka, out from where I'm from, it's not a regulated system, and so it still has its highs and lows, and that means the fish know when to breed and when not to breed, and it's really important for how they've evolved over millions of years. That's why that part of the river is really important. But when we've seen these fish kills, it's having really devastating impacts on their populations, particularly the Murray Cod and golden and silver perches that are just so important for the whole Murray-Darling River system. The Menindee Lakes are often referred to as the nursery of the entire Murray-Darling Basin, and it means that we really do need to be looking out for that. And a recent report found not a single adult Murray Cod in the Lower Darling-Bakka, just a handful of golden and silver perch as well.
So you're saying there's a whole section of the Darling-Bakka River and they could not find a single Murray cod?
No, and they use electrofishing, so they really do find all the fish that are there, and they found juveniles, but they didn't find adults. So we've wiped out, generations of this type of fish, and they're quite long-lived fish.
I was going to say, how long do they live for?
I think they can live between about 60 to 80 years. It's really long-lived fish.
It's like a human lifespan.
Exactly. And part of that is because, they need to withstand droughts. They need to withstand the highs and lows that comes with Australia. And so having wiped out, all of the adult ones, it really is going to be, heartbreaking to see whether the juveniles sort of can make it forward in their life, because I'm not a Murray Cod expert or anything like that, but when it comes to their breeding, they're actually really interesting in the way that the male fish protects the nests and actually sort of sits over it for days after the eggs have been laid. So and that's sort of knowledge that has to get passed down between these animals. So it's devastating to see a survey like that, and what it recommended is that we do need to be seeing connectivity and consistent flows coming down the river, and moving into a hot, dry summer, it's really not looking good out there.
Yeah. So, Kate, I know you've been out there and witnessed some of those fish kills. Just take us through what it's like when you come upon a river where all the fish are dead.
Yeah.
I mean, that must be gutting as someone who's from the area to come upon something like that near where you've grown up.
Yeah, I often I get asked this question, and it's really hard to put into words what the river means to our community. It really is so interconnected with our life out there. And to see, a river that you rely on and, sort of spend your life trying to protect to some extent as well, all of a sudden be treated in a way that it gets to the point where millions of fish are dying. And that's just what we see, all the other critters that rely on that river as well, having, horrible impacts as well. So it's really tough to sort of live through that. I remember the first time saying, I hope I never have to see this again in my lifetime, and just a few years down the track, we see it again. I do hope that now we're going to see more action. The most recent fish kill, we saw an independent inquiry from the New South Wales chief scientist really looking into it and putting some really robust recommendations forward. One of the findings, though, that they actually found as well was just how devastating an impact this has had on the environment, but the community as well. And so as sort of a bit of validation as someone from the community, hearing, someone recognising the impact that this has had, not just on the animals, but us as people as well, and acknowledging that fish kills are symptomatic of broader ecosystem degradation. That this isn't just because, we didn't have any rain or we had too much rain, which is often the excuse thrown around. This is a real problem, and we need to fix it so that we don't keep saying it.
And it's mismanagement that's the problem. Humans are the problem. We've altered how the river should naturally run, and we haven't done enough to fix it. Is that right?
Absolutely. One of the most frustrating things to hear, particularly during those first fish kills, was, politicians in particular saying that they're natural.
Yeah.
On the scale that we are seeing, and we have repeatedly seen out in Menindee, these fish kills are not natural, and they should not happen. And if we allow them to continue to happen, then the native fish species of the Murray-Darling Basin are going to be at serious risk moving forward.
24 hours after being sworn in Sydney, Chris Minns was like a fish out of water in the state's far west.
Inspecting the clean-up and announcing an investigation into a major fish kill at Menindee.
This is the second major fish kill or ecological event that we've seen in the last 5 years.
But this one was 20 times bigger. 4 tonnes of dead, rotting fish removed in the
the day after the Chris Minns was sworn in as Premier of New South Wales, he went out Menindee Way. What was that like for the community?
Yeah, it gave us another real sense of hope that someone was listening. To have, a newly sworn in Premier straight away head out bush and want to hear from locals what was going on. We were still experiencing the fallout from the devastating fish kills of 2023 then. But then to have both he and Rose Jackson as the Water Minister and Penny Sharp as the Environment Minister out there on country listening to locals, yeah, I can't understate what that meant for the community. It's been over 160 days since they've been out there. And of course, with this new Chief Scientist report that we've just seen come out, I really do hope that we see some action on this because, it's just so important for the community. And they've, they recognise as a government that we're still essentially on high alert for fish kills. It's likely we're probably going to see more this summer. And so how we're going to support the community moving forward is going to be really important as well.
Thanks, Kate. This episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 5th of September, and things may have changed since recording. You can visit australiainstitute.org.au for all our latest research and content, and we're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. My Twitter handle is Ebony_Bennett with a _N_T. Kate is at Kate_McBride_1, and our producer Jennifer Macy is at Jennifer Macy, with additional editing by Emily Perkins. Our theme music is by Jonathan McPeak from Pulse and Front, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. And don't forget to check out our upcoming Australia Institute webinars featuring renowned economist Isabella Weber and Craig Rucastle at australiainstitute.org.au. And don't forget to sign up to our Between the Lines newsletter, delivered to your inbox every fortnight-ish, including an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek. Thanks for listening.